Welcome to AuthentiCity FM, episode number 43. I'm Mike Sable. I'm joined as always by my co-hosts and friends, Phil Corrali and Corey Spiegel. And if you have ever wondered how the Game of Thrones, Jim Leland, Gordon Lightfoot, the University of Miami, and Jerry Seinfeld all weave into one coherent framework to describe our next guest, stick around. We'll see you on the other side. Well, welcome back, everybody. We are so thrilled that you are able to join us again. So a little bit of explanation is in order. You can kind of know how this sort of verbal scavenger hunt works. And so our next guest, I said Game of Thrones, which if you're a fan, it reminds me of the First Men, this kind of story about the formation of the White Walkers. And so the First Men are these people who do firsts. And our next guest does a number of firsts, chief among them being the first police officer in the country to actually lead the NAACP local chapter. If you've ever heard of Jim Leland is this sort of grizzled old baseball coach who coached Barry Bonds, our guest's favorite baseball player, who is also a baseball coach. This is the second Gordon Lightfoot reference. So Gordon Lightfoot, of course, wrote the song The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which, of course, refers to Lake Gitchigumi, which is Lake Superior, which is home to Grand Marais, which is home to a cabin for our next guest. University of Miami is a little obscure. Our guest loves Florida, as always, travels there quite frequently. Also home to The Rock. Dwayne Johnson played football there. And so The Rock has this thing, it doesn't matter what you think. And that is part of what our next guest. And then lastly, I want to say Jerry Seinfeld has this show called Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. Our next guest also does a car reference, which is a sing-along karaoke with the chief. My friend and our guest, Booker Hodges, police chief for the city of Bloomington. Booker, welcome.
What's up, man? How you doing?
I am so great. I am so thrilled to have you here. We have been talking about law enforcement on this show, and I kept saying, hey, I've got a guy. We've got to get him on the show. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for trusting in the process. The first question we always ask is, Booker, how did you come to arrive on this podcast, aside from knowing each other?
Yeah, I think I got asked by a guy that was scraping the bottom of the barrel. He was looking for some reject to be on here. So
not at all, man.
That's how I got on
No,
here,
man. We're so excited for you to be here. You are internet famous. So tell us your story. How did you become the police chief in Bloomington? How did you become into law enforcement? Give us your journey.
Yeah. I really don't have one. I mean, I think I've been blessed to be where I'm at. It's a profession I think chose me versus, me choosing it. I grew up in North Minneapolis, which, for people who watch this who aren't from Minnesota, North Minneapolis, where I grew up at, was considered the bad neighborhood, where all the poor people grew up at. I grew up in the housing projects, and graduated from school, went to college in Florida. That's why I love Florida. Came back home to be a police officer, and my journey, law enforcement, took me through a couple different agencies, and then ended up chief here in Bloomington. The funny part, I always laugh about when I got this job was I applied to be a Bloomington police officer about 20 years before I got the job. And when I went to the auditorium, there was like 900 something people in there, and I'm like, yeah, I ain't taking this test. I'm out, right? And all those people that got hired in 2003 all work for me now. So it's kind of funny how stuff works out.
Well, that I appreciate that. So you just shortchanged yourself, because I know that you've got an incredible journey. So we will jump into it. But I do know that one of the things that sort of is part of who you are is you are a big believer in mentors and being a mentee. And so talk to me a little bit how some of your mentors have shaped sort of how you got into this profession. And I know there's a mad professor out there I want you to talk about as well.
Oh, yeah. So, I've been blessed. Like, at the end of the day, I wouldn't be here where I'm at if it wasn't for mentors. And I had some of the best mentors in the profession of law enforcement. Now, these folks were not only good in terms of their law enforcement profession, they were good in terms of their lives and how they lived their lives. And that's the important part that I think a lot of people miss when you go into this professional law enforcement, especially in leadership. You have to provide an example to people who work for you. So the mad professor you talk about, I often call Uncle John, Commissioner John Harrington. He used to be the commissioner of public safety for Minnesota. And he was the St. Paul police chief, and he was a Met Transit police chief. And when I first got hired as a police officer, I was in my master's program. The first police chief I interviewed was Commissioner Harrington. And I'm gonna just, for people to understand what type of person he is. So it was July, and at the time I only had one suit, so I put my suit on, and no cops band, no nothing. It was 97 degrees that day. And he was in the top floor of the St. Paul Police Department, which is floor 6. And I ride up to his office to interview him, and he's in there in this big sweater and it's like 97 degrees. So I'm sitting in here sweating in this suit. I'm like, well, what's going on with this guy, man? Then I look on his desk, and he's got a degree from Dartmouth, and it's on his desk is a coffee weight. He's got like big coffee cup stain on it, and it's like I'm like, excuse me, chief, he got a degree from Dartmouth, and he's like, it's just, it's just a degree. Just sitting there. It's like, okay, man, like whatever, dude. So the next time I went there, he had it hanging on his wall, but it still had that coffee stain on it.
That is
So,
perfect. That's incredible. That's a classic Harrington story too. Like,
yeah, I mean, and I just, so you go meet this dude, you get into the police department, you got to go to the elevator to the 6th floor. You get there, and it's hot as God knows
he's
what.
in a sweater.
Yeah, and he's in a sweater.
So I saw him.
Like,
I saw him
on.
in Wisconsin, like wearing like jeans, long sleeve shirt, dead of summer. Just like his daughter plays softball against me.
It's like, but John likes the South. He likes New Orleans. He likes the South. So he can get away with that stuff and not sweat. Now, if I'd have had that sweater on, I probably would have died. But he survived somehow. I don't know.
So let's dig in a little bit on mentorship and what it means to you as a chief, because I know in this era of hiring, it's not as easy as it may have been in the past. You're not walking into auditoriums full of test takers in the way that we were 5, 10, 15 years ago. And the process takes longer, the pool is shallower. And so the folks that you're bringing into your department hopefully are great and hopefully are going to be there for a long time. But I'm curious, what you see and what your focus is as a chief in bringing that new generation into law enforcement in a very different time than when you got started. What's your focus?
Well, I mean, the younger generation, they're obviously different. And any law enforcement organization, you're always going to have multi-generations in the workforce. And I say all the time, the young folks are right? And here's why they're right, because they're the future, right? Well, we can't do this job forever. So we have to teach them how to do this job the right way. And I think we do a pretty good job of that where I work. But the right way is, we teach them the values, but we teach it in a manner in which they can understand it. Like, so we have to realize that this generation that's coming into the profession they don't know what some of them may or may not know what a CD player is, right? So this generation has never had to deal with that. This generation has everything they want at their fingertips, right? Either any information they can get, they can pull up a phone and they can get it, right? So as chief, I want to make sure that our information systems are set up that way. So when they come into the organization, we have programs that allow them to access information in the same way that they would be able to access information if they were going to look at something on their phone, looking up, like what's the best place to eat, right? We also have to make sure that this generation fully understands why they're doing this job. Because this, at the end of the day, law enforcement is a in-person, human to human contact business. There are very few things in this profession that you would be able to do virtually, right? So yeah, you can take some reports online, but when someone calls and says someone is harming them, a police officer, she or he needs to be willing to respond to that. We've put in a lot of officer wellness programs that weren't there when I first started. And I think a lot of this, what we're doing is kind of copying what Google and Apple have done with their employees, is trying to make the workforce a place where it's welcoming, where people want to come And it's also there to provide some of those services that some people might not have access to. And I know what I'm going to say next is probably sounds bad, but I can't think of another way to say it. A lot of this is really being parents to some folks. If we're hiring 23-year-old folks, a lot of times with this generation and the slow growth strategy, a 23, 22-year-old person might have the maturity that we all had, some of us older folks, when we were 16 years old. Right. And that's something that I think a lot of times people struggle with is like, oh, these people are 25. And it's like, well, yeah, their actual age is 25, but in comparison to what we were, they're like 16, 17 years old. So being able to provide that service, because when I started, if you lived at home, you weren't getting hired as a cop, because it's like, how am I sending you into someone's house if you can't even show that you can manage your own house? Well, now, with the prolonged life strategy that a lot of these folks have taken, a lot of these kids, and I call them kids because I'm old, are staying at home to their 26, 27, 28, 30, which my generation would have never have done, because we were taught once you're 18, you're out the house, you're on your own. But, so really setting up a workforce that really takes care of those folks and is really amenable to some of those generational shifts, I think has allowed us to be successful.
So I want to tug at that a little bit, because as you were talking, I had these little flashback moments of facial hair, visible tattoos, and how these were really, really big, hard discussions for both police and fire, and not that long ago. I mean, we're talking the last decade. And so when you think about the evolution of law enforcement and public safety as an ideology, not only from the workforce standpoint, but with your relationships in the community, because I think it is different now, but I'd love your perspective on how over your career you've watched that evolution happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, you talked about beards and tattoos, right? I haven't received a single complaint about an officer having a beard or a tattoo. Right. I mean, I think obviously you can't walk around here with something that's offensive, but, I haven't received a single complaint about that. And then honestly, it's been to the contrary, where people who have felt connected to officers or use this as a way to connect with police officers. And, we say all the time that, we're a family and you get to come here and be who you are. And if you get to be who you are, we need to allow people to wear these things as long as they're groomed and whatnot. But I think it allows us to continue to communicate effectively with our community and show that we are members of our community. And quite frankly, I just think that old school model of, everybody needs to look the same is not where we're at today in 2026.
So you touched on something, and so you and I have obviously worked together. We know each other a little bit, and so one of the things that you came in when you were first hired, you established a values system within the police department, and you started with one value, and it permeated throughout the department. Tell the story about sort of what is that value, and how does it show up for you, and what has that story been like since you've been chief for the last couple of years?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about it, a lot of agencies will have these, verbose mission statements, value statements, and blah, 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 right? If you go ask the employees, they don't remember any of it, right? You can put $100 bill on the table and say, hey, say the organizational mission statement, and they can't do it. So for me, it was very simple. It's respect. And a lot of the things, the issues that we've had between law enforcement and community is there's been a demonstrated lack of respect. So putting respect in as a core value and really having that discussion with community members and our cops was really vital to our success, because respect is something that people can understand. Now, we might all have different definitions of what respect is, but by and large, our definition of what disrespect is the same. Right? Like, you don't get to talk to people like they're crazy. You don't get to, do stupid stuff to people and expect that it's just going to be acceptable. And also it gives people who do the job clear boundaries, right? It's easy when someone's calling in if they want to make a complaint against an officer, either the officer was respectful or they weren't. And that's an easy standard for us to deal with. And human beings do well when we're respected. We don't do well when we're disrespected, right? So the standard for us is respect is given, it is not earned, right? So that's one of the questions we ask in an interview, is define respect. And anybody that says respect is earned, their application goes in the trash. Why? As a police officer, we don't have that ability to disrespect people who haven't earned it. Everybody gets to be respected, right? And that's what we get paid to do, is respect people. And it's really vital. And I think it's allowed us to be successful, because if you show respect to people, I have seen you're going to get it back 99% of the time. And when people are paying your salary, or, none of these jobs are hostage situations, we all voluntarily signed up for it. It's one thing that just makes our job easier. And when you see agencies that have problems with the community, it often comes down to a lack of perceived respect or actual respect given to community members.
So you talked about kind of young people coming into the profession. As you reflect on your most recent recruit classes and then project to kind of your next recruitments, what are the values you're seeing and the motivations, honestly? Why are the young professionals that you're hiring choosing this profession, and more importantly for you, choosing Bloomington?
Well, I think the profession piece, I think this younger generation has a desire to want to serve their community, is what we're seeing, right? So I think, if you think about it, a lot of these kids, they go to school and they just see division, people fighting. You got COVID, you got riots, you got the war, you got all this stuff going on, right? And a lot of people, this younger generation asks, what can I do? What can I do to not be part of the problem, but part of the solution? And we're getting them to sign up to be police officers, right? And I think this generation, they pay attention to a lot of things, but I do believe that they're firmly service orientated because they've been raised to, believe in service by and large. I mean, that's, this generation. I mean, think when we were applying to college, no one asked about volunteerism or, any of that stuff, right? But now when these kids are applying to college, because we know that grades are, weighted differently than we went. So if you get somebody that's got a 4, how you get a 4.5? Well, there's some kids that get a 4.5 now, right? GPA, right? So when you look at that volunteerism piece, that's what separates a lot of these kids when they're applying for these colleges. And I think that's really helped us. And I also think that a lot of these kids do want to help their community, right? Because they get out, and then when they actually have human interactions, they see that there's some issues and they think they can believe that there's some change that they can affect. Now, for us, I think we are still successful at getting the young people because we view everybody as a family, right? And we do treat everybody as a family. We put programs in place where people can feel welcomed and be who they are, right? And that's, I think, what continues to help us, and I think will continue to allow us to be successful at getting recruits to come into our agency.
So, Chief, all of that is so thoughtful, and maybe you don't see it that way, but I think it's interesting at the manager level to recognize that there are a lot of chiefs, I'm sure, like you, who are focused in this way, and there are some that are still not. And I want to kind of harken back to a point that you almost glossed over in a conversation before, which was, bringing the organization into alignment with the expectations of the youngest generation that is in the organization. That feels very reverse to how I perhaps unfairly would assume a police department would do it, right? That typically it feels like, look, you're coming onto our turf. We don't have to listen to anything that you are saying because you don't know anything yet. We're going to teach you all the things and you'll figure it out. because we'll show you how we do it. And I'm curious, what brought you to a place where you said, no, we are going to focus on this generation. We are going to put our stuff into systems and operational structures that they understand, and we're going to come along with them. How do you get to that place? Because it's not an easy spot in a tradition-oriented portion of public service.
Well, I think, my dad always said, if you don't pay one thing, if you don't pay bills, you better pay attention. And I think a lot of that for folks is you have to pay attention to this younger generation and realize that there are more of them than there are of us. And if they don't want to do this job, who's going to be there when I need to call 911? And that's the approach that I've taken is, we need to welcome these folks into the organization. They are going to be the majority. They are the future. And I've always been a future oriented person. Yes, you have to focus on the here and now, but, we're here, I believe, in these roles that I serve in to make the job easier for the next person to come along, she or he to do this job. We are here to make sure that when people need these services and they call, that they're able to receive these services. And in order to do that, if you're looking at, you're going to replace a 30-year workforce in 5 years and 2/3 in 10 years, if you are not thinking this way, you are going to have significant recruitment problems. And if you look at a lot of the agencies out here now that have these recruitment problems, I guarantee you they're not thinking this way. And that's a significant issue for these folks because they're more caught up in tradition and the way things used to be versus the way that they are. Like back in the day, you could get away with doing stuff that's not on camera. Now everything's on camera. Every single thing you do is on camera. And the AI technology is going on out here now. Like I can take a body camera to a scene and record it. So old school would be like, oh, you got to write that report. You got to write that report. Doesn't matter if you got a camera, this video, the whole thing. You got to sit down for 3 hours and write this report. Well, now I can take this camera, which has transcription on it, and be done with this report in 20 minutes. And and if you're not allowing these young people to do that, you are behind the game. And that's what a lot of agencies do because, it's like, well, I used to do it this way, so you got to do it this way. Nah, it ain't, people used to go to bathrooms and latrines and stuff. You got to flush toilet now, so relax. It's just, that's kind of the way I view some of this stuff.
All right. So that was the perfect segue into kind of what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, which is, right, so this evolution of technology is incredibly fast. Drone as a first responder, translation in your body-worn cam. We're eventually going to have sort of glasses that record from your eyes rather than from your chest. So over the course of your career, you've seen a lot of changes in police technology. What are you seeing that you like? And what are you seeing that is coming on the edge that like a manager ought to pay attention to or something that we ought to like look at and say, all right, I got to get ahead so I can learn this thing. Like, talk to me about technology.
Yeah. So in Bloomington, we got 2 AI police officers who their job is pretty much going out, finding an AI program, police department. But, we're so morally behind when we talk about how we advance technology. And that's going to be the biggest issue. Like, who oversees this technology? So, you see a lot of stuff around the country around Alpers or flock cameras right now and sharing data with that. So a company creates this network and thinks it's a good idea for people to share data around the country, not realizing that maybe someone doesn't want their data shared. And this whole notion of just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should. So I think the privacy concerns is the biggest issue we're going to have to continue to face with the advent and implementation of these technological tools. So people in our generation don't realize what a lot of these tools are capable of. Like 5 years ago, if I'd have told you, yeah, I can tell you basically, when you leave your house and you get to Target because there's cameras along that way that take your license plate. And I can tell you how many times in a week you go to Target because of the camera in the Target parking lot has, shown that you were there. Or I can tell you that I can ping a cell phone tower and figure out, how many times you were in a specific area and how fast you were driving in your car. So all these are privacy concerns. And I think our generation, the older ones, are going to struggle with this more than the younger generation because we came along when people didn't know all your business. But this younger generation has no problem sharing, their business. So a lot of the privacy concerns that people in our generation may have are quite frankly not shared by the younger generation. But at some point it will be, because once people ask the question, who's overseeing these systems, then that's when a lot of these questions are going to come in terms of the data that people are sharing. And I do think the essential threat in terms of public safety is we cannot turn over functions that need to be human 100% to AI and machines. We can't do that. And that's the biggest threat that I see moving forward, because if you think about it, a lot of these AI tools that people are developing, they're going to try to emulate human behavior. And once we get to a point where we're developing robots to go out here and do this stuff, people laugh like it's coming. They're going to develop robots to go out here and do this stuff. We're going to have some problems if we don't have some significant guardrails.
So I'm so glad you said that. It is probably my favorite word lately is discernment. And the bots are amazing. We all use them for a lot of stuff, but judgment is still, at least in the world we currently live in, a human behavior. But I want to kind of flip it a little bit. So I have a teenager. Mike's kids are teenagers. Phil's are a little younger. My child will not post his face or voice online. And I don't know if it's because I terrified him by teaching him very young
Probably,
that
yeah.
someone is always watching, right? Like it could be me and the cameras in the house or Google or Discord, but I'm like, everything you type, someone's watching. Now, when we were kids, the lore from the McCarthy era was it's the government. Now it's the private sector and it's being monetized. And to your point, we don't know what's happening to the data once it goes over onto the private side. We really don't. So how do you think kind of that open source, open access technology is changing behavior of people as you interact, this idea of knowing? And the community I worked in, we had a horrific incident. A little girl got murdered. And so I got to live inside what felt like a episode of FBI for a week. And that was several years ago now. And I can't fathom how differently that case would operate today with the technological advances. But I suspect, and I know there's a joke that no criminal is a smart criminal, but I suspect criminals are actually getting smarter too about knowing how to at least try to evade detection in this world.
The criminals are way smarter than people give them credit for. And they're often ahead of most laws, right? So like, you see a lot of people passing laws for, you can't do AI porn with a real person's face who didn't consent to it. Well, how long was that going on before that law got passed? I mean, so that we're always behind in terms of what people choose to do, in regards to committing crimes in this area. And that's the thing about the technology pieces, right? Most people don't think about what's to come, right? We just think about what's here now. You're not thinking about what's to come. And again, I'm going to go back to what I said. Who controls the technology, right? And I go back to, regardless of, whether you agree with Donald Trump or not, in 2021, 2020, you had some 21, 23-year-old kids that cut the president of the United States off on Twitter, right? And Facebook, right? They made that decision to do that, right? So if you take that, you put that power in the hands of young people where they have the power to cut off the most powerful position currently in our world, regardless if you agree with what he says or not, but who oversees them? And the piece that people miss about open source media and social media is people think it's free. My dad told me, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Somebody had to pay for it. The farmer had to pay somebody to drive it out the field, or pay for the seed. Somebody had to pay for it. So it's open source media that you sign up for. You are the commodity. You are what's paying for the stuff. So people don't read when they sign up for this stuff and it's like, click here if you agree. No one reads that. But if you ever take the opportunity to click there and agree, the privacy you're giving up, like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, if you open them in a browser, you give them permission to look up and utilize anything that you've looked at. There's apps that you give permission to look up your contact information. So any political campaign that people donate to, if you donate to a national party and you put your information in and people don't pay attention to this, you give that party permission to sell your information to third parties. So when you're getting these text messages from these candidates and you're like, well, how in the hell did I get this? It came because you clicked the box because you wanted to look at something that you didn't pay attention to. And that's a huge thing that I think, the laws we got right now are way far behind in the amount of information that, we all give up with a button click that for stuff we don't read.
So I want to kind of dive into this a little, because this kind of proactive versus reactive stance with whatever it is you're talking about in a law enforcement environment, it does frequently feel like it's reactive, right? You're something happens, and so then therefore you react, and you react in whatever way you have to, and then maybe that reaction causes another reaction, and a law gets passed some distance down the street. But the struggle is when you're talking about what expectations are in communities. For police especially, it's how is the police department predicting the bad things that are going to happen and proactively working to stop them before they come, right? I hear it all the time, right? I live in a safe community. My expectation is I can leave my keys in my car, in the cup holder, and the car unlocked, and my car should be there in the morning. And if it's not, it's because the police department didn't think to catch that bad guy before he drove into town. So the struggle, this constant struggle of being proactive versus reactive. I'm curious, in the environment with technology, does that tilt us into relying on the technology to actually let us predict bad things before they happen, right? That to get out of that same reactive mode that we're in.
So I want to be clear on this. Proactivity can be directly tied to staffing. If you don't have staffing, you cannot be proactive. Predictive analytics are going to be polluted with bias. And that's the whole issue with using analytics to predict criminality, right? But my belief is if you have staffing, you can be proactive and not reactive. Agencies that are not adequately staffed have no choice but to be reactive to a lot of these things. So you can do data-driven crime statistics and the whole 9 yards, right? And that's fine, right? But if you don't have people to go out here and actually verify those statistics or where these numbers are happening, it's never going to work. So, I mean, I just want to emphasize, though, predictive analytics, essentially what you're talking about here is, can you predict who's going to commit crimes, is very problematic because we just don't have the adequate data to put in there. And then again, we're going back to human beings and judgment. And that's an issue. But staffing, if your agency is adequately staffed, you will find that police officers are able to be proactive as opposed to react.
All right. So one of the things that you don't know, because we have talked about on the show a lot of times, is that we have talked about you a couple of times. That's why we wanted to have you as a guest. So one of the things that you taught me when we worked together was if you want to change the workforce that you have, there's really one fundamental thing that you have to do. So if you want to diversify your workforce, let's say you want more Asian officers, the solution to that is you have to hire more Asian officers. And so I know you have hired a lot of people in your department over the last couple of years. I'm going to guess it's probably 50%, maybe even 60% in the last 3 or 4 years. So how do you approach recruitment, and how do you talk about it in a direct way that says who we are reflects the community we serve?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's very simple for me. We hire for character. We train for competence. So 95% of law enforcement is character, and you cannot train character. Either you have it or you don't. It's not, we don't expect people to be perfect, but you have to have, I can't teach you not to steal. I can't teach you to be respectful. So, and we hire for character, train for competence. And that's what it comes down to. And when you look at character versus the other model, which is hiring people for competence, and, we'll deal with character later. We've had a success in diversifying our workforce, because what do I mean by that? If you're hiring for competence, you're hiring for people who have already done some form of law enforcement, either security, work for another agency, something like that. Versus if you're hiring for character, it allows us a greater swath of society to get people to come here to work. And yeah, don't get me wrong, 95% of this job is character, right? 5% is competence. But you cannot be a police officer here if you're not able to do that 5%. Just like you can't be a police officer if you're not good at the 95%. So it's the pieces that fit together. But when you're hiring for character, it opens up the pool of people that you're able to bring into your agency. And a lot of people don't want to do that because, it's a human nature shortcut to believe that, if I hire somebody who's worked security or whatnot, they have some idea what the job is like. In actuality, they don't. But at least those folks appear on paper to be less of a gambler or more of a safer bet than someone who may have been a social worker for the last 5 years and then decides they want to be a police officer. And that's the biggest thing that I think that's made us successful, is we've been willing to hire people based on character and not competence.
All right, so I got to challenge that a second. So that's a big risk. That's a lot to ask of the hiring panel, of you, of the department, of the enterprise. Like, how did you get people to say, all right, I'm willing to go with you on this, or I'm willing to take that risk of getting somebody that maybe doesn't meet A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but I'm still going to be willing to train them? Like, how do you, at the end of the day, like, sell the organization that this is maybe a different way to do it or a better way to do it?
Yeah. So what you find when you hire people with character, you're hiring good people. So when you bring them into the workforce, they're respectful. They know how to talk to people. They know how to interact with people. And people see that. And then on top of that, they're going to be in shape, because one of the things about being respectful is, you're going to do a job, this physical job, you need to come in shape. They know how to talk to people again. And I think, for us, people have seen that you bring these people in an organization, they can do the job. Because most people don't care who's next to them if they can do the job. And when the organization, so when I took over, as you know, you were there, we're hiring big classes, big classes. And these big classes, when people were seeing that they were coming in and they were able to do the job, that really sold people on what.
So I'm going to throw an unfair question at you. In that environment, how do you think the civil service hiring process supports the ability to hire as you want to? Or do you think the civil service process could be augmented in some way?
I 100% do not support civil service. I think civil service processes were set up to do one thing, and in actuality, they've done the opposite. So civil service, what you really find is you get somebody who places 100 out of 100 the first time they do the test. The second time they get 50 out of 100, and the next time they get 10 out of 100. Well, that person that gets 10 out of 100 is the same person that got, was 100 on the list last 3 times ago. They just got better at taking the test. And that, it's set up, and, I think the data is going to show when you look at it, you don't really get any diversity out of it because you get good test takers or people who are repeat people versus the way we do it is we interview everybody. If you meant to meet the minimum qualifications for the job, you get an interview. Now, I'm not going to lie, sometimes you're doing 3, 4, 5 days worth of interviews, but at least that way, every single person gets an interview. You're able to, ask them the character-based questions. It's not just a paper. It's not a test, right? And that's the issue because no one can show you that taking a test makes someone a better police officer. It's just a way to, weed people out because, people want to be lazy. God forbid we have to interview 600 people, but, we've had processes where, that 110th person you interview, we're the best person on the list. Right. And then they end up becoming great police officers. So I do not support civil service. I think it's actually accomplished the opposite of what it was intended to.
So I appreciate that because I have had some choice words about civil service on many an episode in this podcast because it's like a century-old system.
Yeah.
It was built for an era that has been gone a really long time. And so that, I think you covered it really well with hiring because it traditionally is always about the funnel, right? What is the easiest way for us to weed people out? And what it sounds like you've been working toward is how to find the right people, which, yes, it's probably a little more time intensive on the front end. It's very anti-structure the way it's always been done. But if your outcomes are far superior, one could say you're building the model of what better looks like for the next era of law enforcement.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about, is getting the best people in the profession. And I've never seen a civil service process that's yielded those results. And, anybody that defends the system is, normally typically people who benefited from it or some old school folks, right? But I'm going to go back to, you can't tell me if I post a test today and someone takes it and they're number 100 out of 100, and the next time I do it and they're 50 out of 100, and the next time they do it, they're 10 out of 100, and they're in the top 10. You can't tell me that person has changed from the person that was 100 out of 100 after 3 times of taking the test. They've just gotten better at taking the test, right?
Yep, I totally agree. So one of the things we do on our podcast is so you are the police chief of Bloomington, right? So it's the largest suburb of Minnesota. It's got the airport. It's got the Mall of America. It's got a ton of challenges. And so you got a pretty interesting job, but you're not just the chief, right? You also have a life outside of that. So when you're not the chief, what are you doing to maintain a full life balance? Like, how do you stay active and stay fit and stay connected to the broader community? What do you do outside of work that makes you happy?
Yeah, I think, one thing people don't understand when you're the chief, especially doing it the way I've done it, you can't really go places without people recognize you. I'm like joking to say hood famous, because I'm on YouTube all the time. But, I coach baseball, I go up to the Boundary Waters, I try to keep it balanced. But, I think when you're in these jobs, you got to do the best you can. And, it's a short career, even though it takes a toll on you, it's a very short career. And you do the best you can while you're in these seats, and you make it so the next person that comes in has it easier than you did. But you have to maintain that balance because, again, I can't work forever, right? And when I leave here, I can't expect that, I've put my whole family on hold and then I come out, get ready to retire and expect that they're just going to be welcoming me with open arms if I haven't, attended to their needs while I'm working. So, I mean, that's why I do all this stuff. Baseball, I go out and hang with them and stuff because they will replace me with the one ad. And I mean, and I'm not naive enough to not believe that. So you gotta have fun. But at the end of the day, it's about making sure that you're doing what you need to do while you're there, both at work and at home.
All right. So you opened the door. You said hood famous. We got video evidence of you on YouTube. You do a lot of these things.
Yep.
Why do you do it? And what's the joy that you get from doing those kinds of videos? And if people haven't seen them, you got to go find them. Like the singing, the jokes, the little cowboy hat. Like,
Yeah.
why do you do it? What do you get out of it? What's the value of that?
Well, I mean, for when people knew me, like, I like to laugh, right? I like to laugh. And I think, law enforcement as a profession for years has been, for those old school people, relatively Joe Friday-ish, like just the facts, ma'am, and blah, blah, blah. And as a profession, we haven't done a good enough job of telling people what we do and why we do it. We've allowed Hollywood to define that, right? If you look at some of the most famous some of the most famous shows are famous or, most watched shows out there are law enforcement shows, whatever you like to watch, you can find a police show for it. So for me, it's about going out here telling a story. And then also too, for our specific community, is making sure people know, like, if you commit crimes, we're not going to just, you're not going to do that. We're going to take you to jail. And it's been very effective. Like our cops will deal with people and they'll be like, oh, whatever you do, I can't be on your chief's YouTube video or Facebook. They don't want to do that. But I think, too, it also, from my standpoint, when people are spending their tax dollars to, contribute, I shouldn't say contribute because it's not contributing because you're forced to pay it. But, when people are paying their money for public safety, I think it's incumbent upon us who are in these positions to show people actually in a proactive manner what we're doing and what we are supposed to do. At the end of the day, as a law enforcement agency, we are supposed to lock people up if they commit crimes. We're here to do it in a respectful manner, but we're here to be, respectful and to be trusted. Every single person expects that when you call the police, that you are going to get a qualified person that shows up to your door, that she or he is able to handle whatever situation that you throw at them. And, I think when we do these videos, it shows people that we're not only able to do that, but also shows people what we're supposed to do. And I think, it's been very helpful for our department.
So there was a little breadcrumb that got dropped a while ago about the fact that you and Mike worked together. So I feel like we need to know more about what it was like from your perspective to work with our good friend, Mr. Sable.
I miss Mike every day, man. I mean, seriously. So Mike was the assistant city manager. Mike always writes stuff down on notepads and does head math. But I mean, it was, I mean, the thing about Mike for me was, I don't think Mike ever said no. And it's not like saying no to like kiss your butt. I mean, that's not who Mike is. It was, if you came to Mike with a good idea and it was thought out, regardless of, how forward thinking it was, he was always willing to let you try. And that to me has allowed us to be successful. Because again, law enforcement agencies are risk averse. And that's kind of the expectation people take when they're dealing with people in my position, is that you are risk averse. So when you go to people and you're not risk averse, they typically look at you like you've been drinking or smoking something, right? And, Mike was always willing to allow us to try different things. And again, I think that's what's allowed us to be successful in Bloomington, was the ability and willingness to allow us to do that stuff.
Well,
So-
I did not pay you to say that. That was a really nice thing because I actually believe it's true. Like there's a ton of good ideas. And so like if city managers can sort of get out of the way and support effort and like, this might not work, but let's give it a shot and let's learn from it. Like I was always a big fan of just trying stuff. And so, and I will say, the city hall structure there was like the police department had their own little door. They had their things. And so it felt like the farthest room away from each other. And I remember distinctly making a point to come over every day. I would steal candy out of your jar. You always had like the
Yeah.
high chews with the right.
Yeah.
Like it was one of my favorite parts of the day was just to come over and just like see what's going on. And so, for city managers who maybe don't have a great relationship with your chief, like the first thing you do is just go visit and say hi and
Mhm.
share a candy and like just talk. So, I didn't pay you to say all that, but I really do appreciate it because it means
Yeah.
a lot to me.
Yeah. That was all good, dude. I mean, yeah.
It's not easy to be that nice to Mike either. So, you know, that really does speak, I think, Chief, to your character and your ability to honestly depict. But we love Mike too. He's, you know, his quirks are what brings us joy. And his note taking is inspirational because it forces me to likewise throw words on a piece of paper that I'll never use. But the best part about Mike is that he knows how to bring a guest onto this podcast who's going to be interesting and fascinating and have good story to tell. And I just, before we move into a different direction, I want to hop back for just a moment to talk about your videos and the work that you're doing in them, because I want to throw you some props, man. This is not something that chiefs like to do. It is not something that managers like to do. And I can't say that I do it as well as you, but it's something that I have tried to do as well, is to put faces and names to the work that we're doing as a community and to build awareness around the work. Not because we're trying to pat ourselves on the back and not because we're trying to brag or anything like that, that it's about finding a path toward whatever it is. If you're trying, as you do, I think effectively, to shame some people into staying out of your town, and to say, look, we're focused on this. We're paying attention. We got people. Our team isn't gonna play ball with this. That's strong, but it's also a recruitment tool. It's also a reassurance to your community. It's also a reassurance to your elected officials. It's that it underscores what we were talking about before about proactivity and reactivity, that you're thinking ahead, right? It's what are these things and how are we going to continue to make sure that we're doing the things that the community expects? How are we treating the community with respect? And I just want to throw you those props, because I think if every chief of police was out there talking about what their department's doing and been focused on, as opposed to being afraid of the blotter and being afraid of the reporters that are going to call, that's never going to work in your favor. We live in an environment today where the expectation is you're going to be open. You're going to be transparent. You're going to tell the story. You're going to explain where it went well, where it didn't. And the people who don't are the ones who find themselves struggling in the news. And so, you know, it's a model worth following. Chiefs out there, tune in on YouTube. There's plenty to see. There's plenty of good content.
Yeah, no, I have fun, man. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And I think people don't realize a lot of people that get these positions spend a career being risk averse. And, you know, I don't view what I do as risky, but a lot of people do. A lot of these folks who get promoted to these positions are fly under the radar type people, which is fine. But, you know, I don't think you do your department, the profession, or the agency any favors when you do that. And the other part is, you know, when something happens in your community, it can't be the first time when people see you, right? When you've been in a position for years. Like, people need to know who the local officials are, who control the people who in our form of government have the greatest responsibility. If you know, I get to choose who goes out in a patrol car with a gun, with the legal authority to use force against people, including to take someone's lives, right? So if I am hiding in a bunker in an office and people don't know who I am, do you think they know who the person who shows up to their door is? No. They don't, right? But it's easy to sit in your office and do nothing. It's easy to be risk averse. And, I would argue that, a lot of times cities want that. I get some of the criticism I get is, well, you make it seem like it's a high crime area. Well, no, I don't believe that. But at the same time, in our community, houses stay on the market for 48 hours and they're gone. People want to live here. These corporations we have want to be here because of the public facing stances that we've taken regarding crime and how we're going to enforce the law. So it's been beneficial to us in that way. But again, people who take these chief jobs, by and large, have had an entire career in which they've been rewarded for being risk averse. So I don't expect many of them, if any, to do business the way I do.
All right. So that you kind of opened a door for me to talk about. So I have watched you do recruit classes and introductions, and you are very clear about setting expectations for your team, for everybody that works for you. And I've heard you say, right, we're going to be, when we are the most respectful, we will be the most respected. And the other thing that you say is like, if you are acting within policy, I will have your back 100%. If you're outside of policy, you are going to be gone. Talk me through, where did you learn that, and how did you how do you speak in such clear language to new officers and new people in your department? Like, where does that come from?
Well, I think I've been fortunate to be blessed with the ability to effectively communicate with folks and make it simple and just let them know, because I don't need a piece of paper to write down. It just all comes natural. So to tell people, give them the clarity that I wanted to have when I started this job. Bottom line, you're going to go out here and do your job. If you're out here doing some policy and procedure, don't worry about it. You'll be fine, right? I got your back, right? Because borderline, you and me going to have a tough conversation behind closed doors, but I'm not going to throw you under the bus publicly. But if it's across the line, it's not just me, it's everybody that puts on that badge and patch that's not going to have your back, because we work too hard to earn the reputation we got. This community loves our police department, and you're not going to do anything to mess that up, right? And it's clear to folks, right? They know where they stand, right? So with people, if someone's getting disciplined, everybody knows, well, the chief said that if they violate policy, it's outside, this is what's going to happen. I think that clarity really helps people when they are doing this job.
So what's one thing that you've been thinking about as a chief that we haven't asked you about yet?
I think the one thing that I think no one's really discussing in non-political terms is political violence. I think that is an area that the two areas I think we're completely getting our butts kicked is currently is human trafficking, right? I mean, we're behind the 8 ball on that. But in the future, I think we're behind the 8 ball in terms of how we view political violence, right? We have a First Amendment here in the United States. And in many instances, it appears that people are unwilling to place any limits on that. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out if people continue to follow through with these threats that originally start off as First Amendment protected speech. Right. And that's and I think, philosophically, people don't understand the effects of political violence on the effectiveness of our country and our government. So what do I mean by that? If good people feel like they're going to run for office and they're going to be targeted with violence, they're not going to run for office. You're going to get the people who are narcissists, don't care about nothing. And those are going to be the types of people who are running your governments. And you look at what we're getting now. And I'm not trying to say that all of them are this way, but how many highly intellectual individuals you think are in Congress right now or in your local governments right now? And these are the people that make the policy decisions on how they spend our tax dollars, the policies that are made out there for people who are in charge of people like me who run police departments. Do we want the lowest common denominator running these entities? And I think that the effects of political violence, you are going to continue to see a degradation in the quality of our elected public officials. And that is a threat to all of us.
Thank you. I would totally agree. And we saw, I would say, the first real flare up of it during COVID with school boards. And lately, now, at least in local government circles, you see it around data centers and who in the city staff gets charged with keeping the peace in a council meeting? The police department. And back to everyone's recording, everyone's got a camera angle, and I went through it here. I got called some very colorful language for many months. And that was exactly it. I can say whatever I want without consequence. And it does impact a lot of people. And that gets back to accountability too, though. When people choose to say whatever they want because they can, that's actually a breakdown in our social fabric and the constructs of how we deal with each other. And so I hope the younger generation learns from these errors, but it happens everywhere at all levels right now. And I think you're right. It's pretty darn scary.
Well, the younger generation is worse in this feeling out here that you can say whatever you want. And quite frankly, you can do whatever you want, right? I mean, you look at a lot of these mass shooters, they're not people our age. They're, unfortunately, a lot of our young adults out there. And it's something that if we don't pay attention, don't address, not just pay attention to, is going to have significant consequences for our society down.
All right, so we went through a little heavy topic, so we're gonna transition a little bit. So one of the bits we do on this show is you got a captive audience of city managers and city leaders. Like, what's a question you would have for us? And again, our pledge is to answer it however poorly, but we'll commit to all giving answer. What's something you want city managers? What's a question you have for us in various states and different levels in the organizations? Like, what's something you want to know from us?
Yeah, so I think, what I tell people when they take chief jobs is they have to be able to answer the question for the city manager if they're not willing to ask them this question. Are you a city manager who likes or doesn't like politics but understands politics? Or are you a city manager who likes politics and wants to be a politician but doesn't want to run for office? That determines what type of person you're going to work for, right? Because, you got the one who understands, and I like the people who like politics, understand politics, but don't want to be a politician. Those typically are probably some of your most effective city managers. But that person who likes politics and wants to be a politician, or likes politics but doesn't want to be a politician, are typically the ones you kind of got to look out for. So that's the question I think that most people in my position would ask their city manager. Because you've been working around. Most police chiefs are in tune to pretty much almost every aspect of the city, almost, right? We got the biggest budget, so when we're having budget discussions, we're looking at everybody's budgets and whatnot. But that question right there in terms of politics, because that's a big one.
I'm gonna cheat, and I'm gonna say, Corey, you should go first.
It's not even cheating when it's like one of the tricks you have. So I have the privilege of being an alumni of the profession, as I call it. So I get to probably provide a little more honest answer than these two do. And so the two things that were kind of rolling around in my head as you were asking that, when I think about how my job functioned, and I had 10 elected officials, 10 council members, and a mayor, so 11 on 2-year terms. So anybody who ever thinks they want to do it, don't. That's a bad idea. But I will say, I always felt like I had one foot on influence. And I will say that now because that's how effective government had to be done to actually get to successful outcomes. And I had an amazing team and we did extraordinary things. And when you talk about law enforcement, I oversaw an organization that had some of the highest homicide rates and some of the highest youth violence and gun crimes. And I know more about all of that stuff than I ever wanted to. But to actually affect change in a world where there's collective bargaining and civil service and an aging Midwestern community, that was the lever I had to use. To the core of your real question, though, I don't like politics, nor do I want to ever be a politician. But I understand the political process. You have to give a little to get a little, and to keep 11 people reasonably happy is kind of a piece of art and a little bit of science. But my joke was always, when you're at different events and you'd have the mayor, the council, well, come get in the picture. And I'm like, no, that's your role. I don't need to be in the picture. You are the elected stewards of the community. That's your place. I'm here to make sure the place runs well. That's my place. And so that is kind of the two-part answer for me to your question.
So I'll throw a couple of thoughts out there, and then I'll make Mike say something out loud too. So it's an interesting dynamic in 2026 versus perhaps when we all started in this career path, because there was a time, and that time it waxes and wanes, but there was a time where there were these strict differences, right? That a city manager shall never be in any way associated with any sort of politics, right? That is, I learned it my first day of my grad school program, the politics and administration dichotomy. They are separate. And, it's not real. And it is, to Corey's point, it is in the exercise of influence, I believe, that managers can be effective. And influence is very intoxicating. And I think managers are sometimes put into a position of being the expert. And it's nice to be the expert. And when everyone's looking at you and you're coming up with the answer and it happens to be the right one and things go great, and then you get comfortable being in the seat that everybody looks to with the expectation that you're going to get it right. And then someday you get it wrong. And how wrong do you get it? And how bad is it when you get it wrong? And so I think the struggle is we have a responsibility to make sure our elected officials are well advised, that they understand the context of the problem, whatever the problem may be, and that they understand that there are many different solutions to the problem. We're going to give you a few, and that doesn't mean that they're the only ones. And it's our job that whenever you ultimately make a decision, we're going to carry it forward. We're going to carry that flag, and we're going to do it. We're sometimes going to do it through gritted teeth, but we're going to do it because that's the job. The job is to follow direction. And if you can't, then you got to go, right? I will say the other thing that I remember vividly from my first day of grad school was with a professor at NIU. And she said, your job is to always be ethical in the way that you carry it out. And so your resignation letter better always be in your top drawer. And you got to know when to pass it across your desk and say, I can't do that. And so I do think we live in a world where politics is constantly injected into every issue. It didn't used to be that way, right?
Yeah.
Water main replacements, I think we all could agree, were generally nonpartisan. That's not true anymore. And so as professionals, we owe it to our staff to be aware of the politics to be aware of the constituencies that are going to be in favor of or upset by whatever it is that we're doing, and to help them understand that. We are therefore also responsible to the elected officials to help them make good decisions so that we're not caught in the muck and mire. But that also can make us very risk averse. And I think that's the struggle. We are constantly, Corey used this example a long time ago on episode 15 probably, where we're standing on one of those ball things with a board that you used to jump on right, and you're trying to keep your balance. That's the world. And the city manager's job is to be as well balanced as is possible, but always recognizing that you can't get comfortable because it's going to shift immediately. So, I don't know if that was an answer to your question, but it was a lot of words. And now it's Mike's turn to talk.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna give the same sort of non-answer answer. So, I mean, I do think you have to. You gotta pay attention to politics. I think big P politics matters. Trends that are happening in the world, trends that are happening across the country, are gonna make their way down to your local community. So, if you're not paying attention to them, you're doing a disservice. And then, the manager gets to have a lot of conversations with the elected bodies, and so you got to be savvy enough to pick up on, okay, I'm hearing a bunch of them say this. Hey, staff, I know you want to do this thing, but there's no political support for it. So let's pivot. Let's put this on the shelf. Let's let that thing grow a little bit. So, I mean, I do think you have to be engaged in the big P politics because you got to be smart. Ultimately, our job is to put forward a recommendation that we can support and live with that puts the community forward. And so, it feels like a cop-out to say that, but I mean, I think you put forward the best ideas that can actually get passed. If you want to go, I live in the city of Minneapolis. Booker, you grew up there. You and I both know it's pretty crazy. Like, there's a lot of electeds who are putting forward ideas that aren't going to work, and they're just charging ahead, and then they waste 2 years trying to figure out what's next. And so that doesn't serve anybody if you're just waiting and kind of just, wasting everybody's time. So, all right, my flip question is how do you answer that question? Like, honestly, what do you want your city manager to do for you in that case?
Well, I mean, for me personally, it's a city manager that understands politics but doesn't want to be a politician, right? I mean, that's the big piece is, if you work for a city manager who wants to be a politician, that's problematic because you can't trust them, right? I mean, that's, so in my positions, you trust city managers who understand politics but don't want to be the politician.
Gotcha.
Right. And that you guys have been around long enough, and it looks different when you want to be the politician versus, understanding politics. I mean, it looks different, right? And that's, yeah. So that's my little 2 cents there.
Well, I appreciate that. So I'm gonna put you on the spot. So when it works well, what do you feel like? What kind of relationship do you have with the city manager when with your chief and your manager? Like what's the ideal relationship that you want to have?
Well, it's ultimately trust. Like, you can have conversations with people and let them know information that that you don't have to tell them, right? I mean, legally, sometimes you might blur the lines a little bit. Not saying to violate the law, but there's a level of trust there that you trust that person to have those types of conversations with, and that's what it looks like. It's simply just trust, man. Because really, in my job, if you can't trust the person you work for, then who can you trust? Right? Because if you can't trust the person you work for, you can't trust the people that hired them because they hired them. So, I mean, that's what it comes down to. And I've seen situations like that where, and it's just, and then magically when the city council finds out that no one wants to work there, they're in DEFCON 5 mode. And yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool. All right, so we are wrapping up on the end of this. So one of our traditions is to kind of give our guests kind of the last word, like impart some wisdom for us. You got as much time as you want to take. Like, what advice do you give to the profession? What advice do you give to other chiefs? Like, give us 3-4 minutes about like where do you see this profession heading? How do we support each other in the service to this community? Give us some going away wisdom.
Yeah, so I'll be brief. Don't work for nobody you can't trust. Don't hire nobody you can't trust from the city managers, right? I mean, because this is the most pivotal, all the other department heads will disagree to a certain degree, but that's not my issue. But to me, the most pivotal relationship is with the city manager and the police chief. is going to have, because the police department is the highest risk aspect of any city. It's also a vital economic component to any city. So if people don't feel safe, they're not going to be willing to spend money there. And it's really important that, again, that people trust each other. So when people are putting in for chief jobs, when they're interviewing you, you need to interview them, right? And if you can't trust the person, don't go there. The city managers are doing backgrounds. If the person can't trust them, you can't hire, right? Because this is one relationship in the city that can ill afford not to trust each other. But the beauty of it is once you have that trust, you can do some great things in the city and in the community, and you can really serve the public and do what people want each other to do. And that's the beauty of it. So that's all I'd say, and I mean, don't be afraid of a city manager, council form of government. My personal preference is that versus working for a politician. Because again, if you work for a city manager who understands politics but doesn't want to be a politician, you're going to have a lot better relationship because you're going to be able to trust that person and get straightforward answers when you need them. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, we are grateful for your time. We are friends outside of work. I was so excited to have you be a guest. You absolutely crushed it as always, as I expected. So we will probably have you back because you're kind of a big deal. As you said, you're hood famous. You're on YouTube and everything else. I will say this to all of our listeners. So right, I have worked in a couple of cities in the region. And so sometimes I'll have a police question and you're always my first call. And so you are a trusted friend and advisor. And so I'm just really grateful that you spent some time with us. So appreciate you doing this. Corey, Phil, thanks so much for episode 43. We will see you guys at our next episode.